Net metering and why its days are numbered. Now why should you care about what net metering is? Well, if you're thinking about installing solar panels at your home, or maybe if you've already done it, you really need to understand what net metering is all about before you make a decision where the financial aspects are going to change on you. Now, the reason I'm making this video, to be point blank about it, I have a book out that explains all about net metering and a lot of basics about solar power. And I'll put a little link down here on the bottom. But the bottom line of why I'm doing this video is when I hear people talking about the aspects of doing solar power and you're going to make a lot of money or you're going to get your power bill down to zero and all those kinds of things, it seems that a lot of people really don't understand when a guy comes to you and they're trying to sell you solar power and they're saying save the earth and you're going to have zero your power bill, and then they'll have a variation of programs where you pay a down payment and so forth and so on. It all funnels back to a basic program that's called net metering. And most people don't understand exactly what that is and that it is going to go away. Net metering is the vehicle that solar installers use to make solar power installation appear to be financially attractive to you. Without it, without net metering, installing solar power at your home would be a really hard sell. And that's because it's so expensive to install it in the first place. If you have it professionally done, it's going to be, I don't know, $20,000, I've heard. You might get a better price than that, but it's in that neighborhood. And you've got to save a lot of money on your power bill in order to make a $20,000 investment pay off in a reasonable amount of time. But before we get to explaining what net metering is, let me give you a little background, a little history on how we got here, why net metering came to be. Net metering ultimately came about because of the invention of these things. Now, what this is called is a grid tie inverter. Now, what it is basically, the basics of this device is it takes the direct current from solar panels and converts it to AC so that you can use it in your home. But this is very special because before the invention of what you call grid tied, what you had was you had a bunch of solar panels and you hook it up to an inverter, and it was basically really good if you lived out in the woods or something and you had no grid there and you wanted to supply your cabin or so forth with electricity. But what this does is this will interface with your live grid at home, whereas the other ones in the olden days wouldn't do that and couldn't do that. In the olden days, if you wanted to use a solar-powered inverter, what you'd have to do is shut off the mains to your house and then go on that, just kind of like you would if you had a generator, an emergency generator. And everybody knows that an emergency generator is only for emergencies. You can't hook a generator up to your house and be on the grid at the same time. It's just not safe and it's not done. As a matter of fact, if you have an emergency generator, you probably have what they call a cutout switch or a transfer switch to prevent you from being on the generator and on the grid at the same time. Now, the old original AC inverters that were made for solar panels were very much like that. Very much like a generator as far as how you could hook them up to your home and so forth. So they weren't of very much use to anyone except, say, someone who lived out in the woods who didn't have access to power in the first place. That was useful there. But with the invention of grid tie, what that meant was you could hook this up to the grid, the live grid in your house, all the time. So you didn't have to have a transfer switch and all that stuff. It's all done automatically internally in this device. It basically will monitor your power line, your AC grid power line, and it will make sure that everything the conditions are all correct And if they are, then it will close its breaker, so to speak, and connect up to the grid in your house. And if you have solar power, you'll be supplying solar power to your home while the grid is live and still connected to your home. So, with a grid tie inverter available, if you hook up a solar power system using a grid tie inverter, now you have the capability of supplying your own power while you're hooked up to the grid. And what can happen is if you produce too much power, what happens is the power that you produce is, if it's more than you're using, it will be shipped up back to the grid. And how does the power company know what to do with that? Well, that confused them at first. And what made it even worse was that, well, if you had, one of the old mechanical meters that they used to have, if you shipped power back up to the grid, well, they would run backwards, so the numbers would go backwards, and hey, you can figure that out, couldn't you? But those are old, and those are probably all replaced now. I guess some people might still have them. But the newer digital ones that they started putting in place, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, they have a feature that is very unpalatable to the homeowner. And the feature is this: whether the power is coming down the grid to your house, supplying you with power for your refrigerator and all that stuff, or whether you've got solar and you're producing, at the moment, too much power and you're shipping power up the grid, the power meter doesn't run backwards. Internally, they have rigged them up so that no matter which direction the power is flowing, the numbers run forward. So in other words, with the newer digital meters, kilowatt hour meters, if you're producing more power than you are using, what happens is you ship that up to the utility, to the grid, power company gets it for free, and the meter runs forward as if you had used that power, and you get charged for it. Now obviously that situation ain't going to fly. So there was a lot of hubbub and what are we going to do about this and so on and so forth, as technology does when it comes online. It creates problems. So that was a problem. When all of those things came to a head, what they did was they invented a system called net metering. And what it basically is that if you ship power up to the utility, they're going to keep track of that and pay you for it somehow. Now, I just said, well, the meters only run forward. How are they going to do that? Well, if you sign up for net metering, the power company, one of the things they do is come out and change out your meter so that the numbers will run backwards. And when you sign up for net metering, what the power companies are required to do is keep track of how much power you use, how much power you ship back up to the pole, and this is the part that they really don't like. And they're supposed to credit you for that power at the same rate that they would charge you for the same amount of power. That's the problem. And that's why net metering is doomed. It's going to end. That issue of the retail and the wholesale price is the same is what makes it non-sustainable. And the reason it exists now, and it has existed for a long time, is because, when it first came about and they first came up with the program, everyone was wanting to promote solar power. And so everybody, decided that we want to do this, and the power companies didn't like it at all. But in those days when it first came about, solar installations were very expensive, and there were just a few people that were doing it. Now let me illustrate why that's a big problem for those of you who don't understand. First thing, point one, is a power company is a business. It's not a state-owned utility or something that relies on taxes and stuff like that. They're heavily regulated, that's true, but they are a business. They have to make a profit. Maybe not much, but they have to make something. So what they do, they produce power. So they have a bunch of power stations that they run to produce power. Now for simplicity, let's just say they got one power station. Now, for simplicity again, let's say that power station, when it buys fuel and does everything, it can produce power for about, say, 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, don't worry about what a kilowatt hour is. It's a measurement of electricity, very much the same as if you go to the gas station and you buy a gallon of gas. A gallon of gas costs so much per gallon, and so you fill up and then you pay how many gallons you got. Well, a kilowatt hour is the same sort of thing with electricity. It's a measurement of how much electricity you use, and if you use so many kilowatt hours in the month, then they charge you, so many per kilowatt hour, so many cents. Now what happens is they're buying power, or they're producing power through power plants, and let's say, for sake of argument, that they're able to do that for 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So now they go out to their company, their customers, and they have lots and lots of customers. And in order to make a profit, they charge you, or the customer, 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So basically what happens is you use, let's say, 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month. And so at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, your bill is $100. Now the power company, it costs them to produce that same amount of power, because they can do it for 8 cents a kilowatt hour. It costs them $80. So they've got a $20 margin with you for profit, and that profit is not just pure profit. These guys, it's not going to the bank and making people rich and all that kind of stuff. These utilities are all heavily regulated. So what it goes back to is, maintaining power lines, buying fuel, paying people in admin, all kinds of things. And there's a little bit of profit in there. All of these big power companies are stockholder owned, so they've got to have a little bit of money going to the dividends and all those sorts of things. But the bottom line is they need that $20 from you and all the other customers, or they can't stay in business. That's just how life is. It's reality. So when you basically produce as much or more power than you need, and you ship that power up that power pole, what happens is at the end of the month, let's just keep it simple and say you're 50-50. You produce 1,000 kilowatt hours and you use 1,000 kilowatt hours. So what happens is you're shipping power up the pole, and they're going to in effect pay you $100, and then you used 1,000 kilowatt hours, so now they charge you $100. They didn't make any money, and they can't exist that way. So what happens is they got to make money off of somebody. So that's why they say, well, we got to jack up the rates on all the other people to make up for these people that we're not making any money on. You can't keep jacking the rates up on the other people, because pretty soon, if people go to solar, they're going to run out of other people to jack up the rates on. And they must make a profit, or they will go out of business. And that's why net metering, the days are numbered. As a matter of fact, at the time I'm recording this, I know that Hawaii and Nevada and there's several municipalities, several states, I can't name them off the top of my head, but they have already permitted the large power companies to stop the net metering things. Now in most cases, the people who have already signed up and invested in this, they scream bloody murder and say things to the effect of, well, hey, we signed up for this because that was the regulations and we did it in good faith, and now you, Public Service Commission, are going to pull the rug out from under our feet? Well, okay, so what they're doing in many of those cases is grandfathering those people in so they can continue, with the arrangement that they originally made. But nobody new is coming on like that. And so what that means is, for anybody new, the net metering isn't there. Those financial conditions exist everywhere. If a lot of people get on solar power, which they should, the net metering part of it is not going to be there anymore, because basically what it requires the power companies to do is to buy and sell power at the same price. And a grocery store can't buy and sell tomatoes at the same price, because they got to make some money off the tomatoes. If they don't, they go out of business. Same for a power company. Now, Does that mean that solar power is not worth it anymore? Ain't going to work, because now I got net metering is gone, or it's going to be gone soon. So it's not worth it? Is that what it means? No, it doesn't. It does change the landscape to discriminate a little bit more on who it's going to be financially advantageous for and who it is not. Now, I've got all of this detailed out in that book if you want to take a look at it. So if somebody comes to you and they start pitching you, well, because of this, and you can pay this down payment, and they have a program, but at its core is net metering, which they almost always are. Look at it really, really careful, because if net metering goes away, the money that the power company is supposed to pay you back or credit you for excess power that you produce is going to go away. In other words, at best, if you produce too much power, for you, it'll just evaporate.